Hello and welcome to the EmpowerHR session on talent mobility best practice research. I'm Fulton, CEO and founder of Fuel 50, the author of Career Engagement Game, with my co-founder Joe Mills, where we talked about how do you create workforce agility. Back in 2015, we had no idea around the amount of agility that was going to be required of employees around the world as COVID and the pandemic hit. We knew workforce agility was going to be important into this decade, but we had no idea around the agility that was going to be required. So as founder of Fuel 50, we are offering a talent marketplace solution that creates opportunities for employees around the world to connect to coaches, to mentors, to career journeys, career paths, and learning to be able to create a future within the organization that they're working for. And a talent marketplace solution is delivering 60% reduction in employee churn in the organizations that we're working with. So we can shift an average of employee turnover from 24% down to 15% across all our 70 customers today. So this is how we're able to support organizations to turn the Great Resignation into great retention results. But my intention today is to share our talent mobility best practice research as part of the EmpowerHR Better Work Summit. We've conducted some research across the globe with over 200 HR practitioners and over 200 employees from countries around the world, the majority in the US, but also through Europe, Australasia, and even Asia. So it's my pleasure to share some of this research today. What we learned from our research is that through the pandemic, there was what we call the big recruitment freeze, which is now behind us. And as we've all heard, we're facing the great escape as employees are starting to look beyond the borders and boundaries of their current organization for future opportunities. So just about every single organization said they had a recruitment freeze at some stage in 2020. And what we saw was that 40% said they stopped all recruitment activity in Q2 of 2020. So there was a complete recruitment freeze during this period. 63% of organizations are predicting that their recruitment is going to increase, and this is part of what's driving the Great Resignation at the moment. There are more opportunities, an abundance of opportunities, almost an avalanche now that the big freeze is over. So we know that we can impact employee retention in a very direct way. So talent mobility programs have had a proven positive impact on employee retention, where a talent marketplace can be used by employees. And as we're facing this return to work, we're all still debating what a return to the office is going to look like for employees. So 76% of our respondents said they would implement a hybrid working environment, allowing employees to continue to work from home. And 54% said that this offer would be available to some employees, not necessarily all. So we can see as we're looking ahead this year that our working conditions are very different to the pre-pandemic. We also found that gains in productivity came at a cost with employee well-being during the early stages of the pandemic. So productivity was not negatively impacted, but employee well-being took a big hit. So nearly half of all our respondents said that employee well-being decreased during the pandemic. And 89% of workers said their work life was getting worse. 85% said that their well-being declined, and 56% said that their job demands had increased over this time. So more pressure on people through this period. I'm just wondering what you found in your organizations, and I'd love to encourage you to put questions, comments into chat as I'm presenting, rather than having this as a one-directional conversation. I'd love to hear what you saw. Did your employees report a decrease in their well-being during the pandemic? Please throw your comments and questions into chat. So we have been putting out a work fit handbook to support organizations during the pandemic, to help organizations create cadences and communication, coaching and care for their employees, to make sure that we are still maintaining productivity and performance and an engaged workforce during this period. So just checking to see if any chat has come through. No, we're all good for now. So just through 2020, we used that opportunity to want to understand what are the current talent mobility best practices. What does best-in-class talent mobility look like? And what are the best-in-class organizations doing to drive talent mobility across their organizations? Our audience is probably very representative of the audience that we have online today. So we had a very strong response from HR practitioners across all sorts of industries, but primarily professional services, scientific, technical services, and finance and insurance, which was representative of our client base also. But these were not, confined only to our client base. The majority were from North America, Europe, and UKI, and also Australasia, Middle East, and even Latin America were represented. We also surveyed employees because we thought we wanted talent mobility impacts employees just as much as it does the organisation. So we had a very good representation of employees. And again, you can see the 41 of the respondents were all from professional, scientific and technical services. So again, very high concentration in those industries where talent mobility is important and where reskilling was really important. We had quite a high tenure in our response group from employees. So 20 years was the most common length of tenure. And one of the things that we wanted to ensure is that we did have a good representation, but that everyone was in employment at the time. Our primary goal was to understand what the best performing organizations were doing. So we were able to segment our responses as to organizations that we classified as HR best in class. So those organizations had lower attrition, they had higher internal mobility, they had lower recruitment costs, they had less unfilled positions, they had higher employee productivity, and they were also investing more in training and development. So that was what we deemed our HR best in class segment. We also looked at those organizations that were high performing overall. So the best business performing organizations had higher revenue growth, greater total revenue, more revenue per employee, better market share, better NPS scores, and better sales growth year over year. So those were our two audiences of best in class. And one of the first things that we found was that there was a really powerful, strong link between what HR was doing and the overall business performance. This correlation down here of 0.443 double starred at a 0.001 statistical significance really means that we can have a lot of confidence that what HR is doing is impacting business performance. So all of us here on the call today should be really proud around the difference that talent practices and HR are making to overall business performance. If we correlate, if we contrast this statistic with aspirin or Tylenol and headache reduction, which has got a correlation of about 0.13, which is like almost 1 chance in 10 of taking an aspirin and your headache reducing. So what we really know from this is that we've got a really strong correlation between what HR is delivering into the organization and business outcomes. So from here, we actually started to deep dive into what are the best in class organizations doing, and this is what I wanted to share today. I've seen a little chat come up, so right, thank you, Emily, for sharing that there was a lot of burnout and concerns about mental health, and we just have to take those those concerns really seriously. And I do agree that in 2021, there was just as much concern, and it's almost the the long-term impact that we saw on mental health because of the sustained challenges to all of us. So I think do have a look at our, I've got some links at the end of the presentation, but do have a look at our change model about what leadership and HR can be doing to support the mental health of our employees. Thank you, Emily. So coming back to what are our best-in-class organisations, what are they doing that, and what's being prioritised in those organisations? So number one, they're placing strategic importance on employee reskilling and development, a very high priority. Number two, we learned that leaders were taking an active role and engaging and developing their team. They were pivotal in terms of the difference it was making on those business outcomes. Number three, we found that there was a very strong correlation between having visibility to talent across the organisation, understanding your bench strength, understanding the skills and capability across the organisation. And the fourth takeaway was that leaders were given tools and resources to support employee development, so that leaders were enabled to have those quality career and development conversations. They had learning assets, a targeted and understanding of employees' skill gaps and readiness, and links to the assets that were needed to help those employees develop. So the first thing that we wanted to look at was what were the best-in-class organisations prioritising? What was on their 2022 people agenda? And I need a bit of engagement from all of you on the call. So I'd love you to pick A to H as to what is on your people agenda for 2022. What are your top priorities? We've got leadership development, diversity and inclusion, employee experience, employee reskilling, internal mobility, career path visibility, thinking about the future of work, or building out seamless internal and external talent pools. So I'd love to hear in the chat, if you could take a second to throw, what are your top priorities? And we can contrast those with what we found from the best-in-class organisations. So have I got any chat yet? Love to hear your thoughts around what, you just throw in an A, B, C, D, E, F, G, or H. Just hear what's, okay, inclusability becoming a more prominent phenomenon in practice as we get out of the Great Resignation. Yeah, 100%. Any other comments? According to McKinsey, employees want their organisations to put a greater emphasis on flexibility, competitive compensation and well-being. Yeah, we're starting, I've got some comments around compensation to have a little bit. Okay, I'm getting lots of A's, leadership development. We heard that. G, future of work. Some clues coming up about that in a minute. DBG, I'm getting a bit of everything. It looks like the A's are winning. So a lot of organisations prioritising leadership development, knowing how important leaders are. So what we saw was that, a little bit like your response in the chat today, we saw that 80% of organisations were prioritising employee reskilling and skill building, 75% were prioritising internal mobility, and another 75% on career visibility. So concern for the strategic bench strength of the organisation was very much part of what we saw. So it was interesting that despite over 75% of organisations having strategic priorities aimed at building internal mobility, less than half of HR actually had visibility to the skills and capabilities across their organisation. It was a problem area that they couldn't necessarily, they might be prioritising skill building across the organisation, but little visibility as to the actual capabilities. And that HR teams are not necessarily having visibility or access to tools to help them search for capabilities. So what we found, where talent visibility was offered, there was a gain spiral, a positive gain spiral. So where we could provide talent visibility across the organisation, there were more positions being filled internally. And if you think of the ROI on filling positions internally, so you're going to have faster time to productivity, less recruitment costs, better talent retention, and those organizations also had better diversity outcomes. So having visibility to your talent and skill across the organization was associated with better diversity practices. And then we saw this gain spiral where if you had talent visibility as to skills and capability across the organization, there was higher internal mobility, so more lateral movement, more movement across the organization. There was lower attrition, so powerful impact on retention in organizations and preventing this great escape that we're talking about. There was higher employee productivity, there were lower recruitment costs, there were less unfilled positions, and there was also more investment in training and development because the organization had an understanding of the skills and capability across the organization. So coming back to my question to you, let's have a look at what the best-in-class organizations were prioritizing versus the rest. So the majority of people, as did you guys, I think the majority came up with that leadership development was top of the agenda. Number 2, diversity and inclusion was high priority. Investing in the employee experience was a high priority for HR, employee reskilling, and then this internal mobility and career path visibility was number 5. But let's contrast that with what the best-in-class organizations said. They also chose leadership, as did you. But what we saw was that there was a more strategic future orientation for the best-in-class organizations. They had a longer lens. They were looking at their workforce more strategically in terms of a 5-year view around the future of work. What do they need to anticipate, and how did they take their employees on that journey of reskilling? So the organizations getting the best business outcomes, the best HR organizations had more of a future lens around future of work and also building a seamless internal and external talent pool. Other than that, there was pretty much the same kind of things that we saw across the 2 groups, but with those differences there. I think I'd really like to spend a minute talking about what the organizations that were achieving the best inclusivity and DE&I outcomes were achieving. So what were those organizations doing? So we were able to go through our results and see the organizations that were getting best outcomes when it came to DE&I, so diversity, inclusivity, and equity in the organization. So those organizations had better representation of females at all levels. There was more equity in the remuneration, financial and non-financial. There was better promotion rates, better engagement across diverse backgrounds. And I feel that you on the audience here would agree with me that they are amazing outcomes, right? Imagine if your organization could achieve those kind of outcomes for their target audiences across the business to drive diversity and inclusivity. So while 80% of organizations said that was really important to them, and 70% said they had recruitment goals for creating a more diverse employee population, what we found was that only 50% were actually reporting on their outcomes. So only 50% had any kind of data on how they were tracking on key diversity outcomes. So a bit of a disconnect, 88% saying it's really important, only 50% actually reporting on those outcomes to their stakeholders. So we think that there's a shift. What we measure, we will create, right? What we measure will get done. So I think there's really important takeaways that we should be measuring and tracking our progress on those outcomes. I'm wondering how you guys are getting on with tracking gender and diversity outcomes in your organization. Is it something that's being measured today? Please pop that in chat. According to Deloitte, organizations that were doing a good job on diversity, equity, and inclusion as a business priority were 6 times more likely to be innovative, 8 times more likely to have overall better business outcomes, twice as likely to meet or exceed financial targets, 6 times more likely to be agile, and 3 times more likely to be high performing. So, you know, there's some really wonderful business outcomes that can be expected for those organisations that are investing in their DE&I policies. Just checking to see if there's anything in chat from the audience. Nope. So what I wanted to share next is, again, the best versus the rest. So what were the organisations that were achieving the best outcomes with DE&I practices? What were they actually doing? So they were prioritising leadership and future of work. So they were already in that best-in-class outcomes group: employee experience, employee reskilling, and internal mobility. But what we saw in terms of what they were actually investing in for their people, it was highly differentiated. They were investing in mentoring programs for their target audience, so creating learning opportunities specifically for that audience. Project participation, stretch assignments, gigs were all active learning opportunities, experiential learning, so partnering your target audience across the organisation with mentors really seemed to be game-changing for those organisations achieving the best outcomes. It was quite a wonderful takeaway that mentoring can make such a difference. We've got a webinar coming up soon ourselves where I've got Laura Peterson from RTI, who's doing a great job on both getting diversity outcomes across the organisation, but also mentoring programs. So look forward to sharing that early in the new year. 50% result. So there was a question in the chat around 88% want to improve diversity, inclusivity outcomes versus 50% actually reporting on their business outcomes. And yes, that would be publicly reporting, but this was as recorded by our HR practitioners. So the HR practitioners themselves had visibility to the outcomes that the organisation was achieving. So we thought that was quite disappointing, the disconnect between the desire to do it and the actual recording. So if we don't have baselines, how can we know if we're making a difference? So yeah. So I think reporting can make a big difference. So making sure that you're tracking and sharing it to stakeholders. But this was as reported by HR practitioners themselves. So if they don't know the outcomes or don't have visibility to the DE&I outcomes of their business, I mean, I think it's really important and something that can be improved on. Hopefully that answers the question. So the next thing we looked at was what in particular were differentiating the organisations getting the best DE&I outcomes. So they placed strategic importance on employee development, adequately investing development for all employees, but particularly to their target audiences. Their leaders were particularly supportive. Leaders were enabled, leaders had understanding of skill gaps of their employees and were able to support them. And there was retain and rotation programs in these organisations. So the organisation was prioritising talent mobility, giving people these transfers and opportunities, stretch assignments, projects, and investment in actual experiential learning for their target audiences. So yeah, the organisation's overall culture was supporting internal mobility with lateral movement encouraged to create learning experiences for their target organisations. So the best in class D&I segment was 15% of our respondents, and those organisations had above industry averages for both females and employees of diverse backgrounds. So we thought these were stunning outcomes and some learning about what we need to prioritise and invest in our people, and just knowing that stretch assignments and mentoring can make a difference to your business outcomes around diversity and inclusivity. So 70% of our audience said they actively promote diversity at all levels of the organisation, but only 1 in 3, a third of the organisations who responded said, a third said that they still needed to improve their female representation at senior and executive levels, so lagging on the gender representation at those levels, so still work to be done. And when you start to look at the presence of a diverse representation at executive levels, you can see it starts to drop. Yeah, reasonably good employees of a diverse background, but female representation is lagging still at a senior management and executive levels. So it's still work to be done across multiple organizations. However, there's, again, good reason to invest in increasing your gender representation. So companies with leadership in the top quartile for gender diversity were 15% more likely to have financial returns above the industry median. So that can make a difference. And companies with leadership in the top quartile for racial and ethnic diversity were 35% more likely to have financial returns above the industry median. So again, some wonderful sound bites for you to share with your stakeholders in terms of why we should be investing in these programs for our people. And organizations that prioritized and had higher diversity also prioritized internal recruitment. So looking internal first rather than going to the external market. So looking at creating opportunity for employees across the organization. So massive takeaways there for our audiences around how do we facilitate better DE&I outcomes in our organizations. So the next segment of our research starts to look at how do we facilitate internal talent mobility, and how do we get these kind of outcomes in organizations. So we know it's important to organizations. 60% said that it's internal talent mobility is extremely important, and 43% said that reskilling was a top priority for them across the organization. In your organization, how many of your positions are filled internally? I'd love to get a sense about what you're seeing. Are you still having to look to the external market, or do you have a good talent pipeline within your business? What are you seeing? I'd love some thoughts from the audience around what are you seeing? Do you look internal first within the organization? Is there a culture of internal talent mobility within your business? I'd love to see some thoughts. So actual movement across many organizations is still quite low, and people are still recruiting externally. It's often maybe easier to find talent externally than it is within the business. So this comes back to that talent visibility is a gap area for so many organizations. A third of the organizations said internal hiring was only 25% compared to external recruitment. So, imagine if 75% of your positions are being filled externally, what are the costs associated with that? And 5% of people participated in a lateral move last year. One of our client organizations saw massive gains through deploying a talent marketplace with internal talent mobility. So pre the deployment of their marketplace, they had 35% of positions, 35% of people were participating in a lateral move. After the marketplace was deployed, 55%. So there's a big shift in terms of internal mobility. I'm checking in on the chat. Okay, well done. So somebody's shared that in the last 4 to 5 months, majority of our recruitment has been internal and internal first. So I think that we can see there's some wonderful business gains that we get when we go to our own talent population. What we saw in a previous study was that where you look internal first, you'll see better engagement. You'll see lower attrition. The surprising result was we also saw lower absenteeism, and I think it's just a result of having a more engaged population. We asked ourselves why would that be the case? And what we found was that where people saw other people getting opportunities, there was a culture of growth and learning and opportunity being evident for people, and people saw other people getting opportunities, and that translated into the better engagement and lower absenteeism and a more engaged workforce. So the majority of organizations don't even know what position, or a third of them don't even know what their internal recruitment ratio is, and don't know what range of internal hires sit within the organization. So there's still some gaps in measurement. So we also asked our audience, what was holding you back from delivering higher internal talent mobility, or delivering a talent mobility program in your organization? So I'd like to pose that to the audience. What's holding you back from a really robust talent mobility program today? Is it availability of open positions? Is it having tools to support visibility of opportunities to employees? Is it a culture supportive of talent mobility? Or is it a visibility to skills and capabilities across the organization? Choose A, B, C, or D. What is holding your organization back from achieving higher levels of internal talent mobility? I have the results here, but I'm really keen to see what this audience chooses. Lack of training. Okay, so people aren't necessarily being prepared for opportunities has come through as being a challenge to achieving higher levels of internal talent mobility. Culture. I suspected that one might come up. So a culture of having leaders engaged, challenging the hoarding mentality in organizations seems to be one of the things that we saw as well. Just wondering if anything else is coming through, but yeah, some good conversation coming through from the audience. D, so having that good visibility. Yeah, lots and lots of Ds. So visibility to skills. So if we don't know who's got what, how can we place people into opportunities? And not surprisingly, some are choosing A. So just even having opportunities or places for people to go. And that's where stretch assignments and projects can create a sense of mobility without necessarily having immediate open opportunities. So yeah, a raft of really good feedback. Thank you guys for all your suggestions here around what's holding your organization back. So what we saw from our research was that 40% said it was just about having that lack of positions. 37% said that there wasn't sufficient processes to support internal mobility. 26% said it was the culture, so not necessarily having a culture of talent sharing and how challenging that culture of talent hoarding, or leadership's wanting to hold on to their people rather than an understanding of the benefits of talent sharing and talent agencies, where leaders who are doing a great job of growing and developing their people and seeing their people flourish and move on to other opportunities become talent magnets. So we do know it's possible to shift that culture gradually to encourage leaders to see the benefit. But what we also found was that giving leaders that visibility to bench strength and pipelines made a huge difference in creating a culture of talent sharing. People were allowed to go on projects and stretch assignments because organizations could see that they could backfill, and leaders could see that they could backfill those positions. So HR not having visibility to talent bench strength was a barrier for 25% of our respondents. Just checking in, I've seen another chat pop up. Yeah, so lack of succession plan, and that comes back to understanding talent pipelines and giving visibility to talent pipelines across the organization. And as part of that pipeline building, what's come through in the chat saying not identifying employee goals and helping them achieve them. So understanding about employees' skill gaps, understanding where they want to go and helping them create and craft a learning plan and a career plan to support them on that journey. So we understand that, you know, the planning piece of the puzzle is really important also. So organizations that are at the best in class have got that future orientation that we saw and are investing in workforce planning to be able to analyze workforce skills gaps and determining the steps to prepare for future staffing needs. And if we think about workforce planning as the simplest definition, having the right people, right place, right capabilities at the right time. I love that definition. And I think that first came from the Australian HR Institute. Very, very simple definition and commonly held. Easily said, but quite hard to do. We need that baseline of data across the organisation as to who's got what skills and capabilities. We need to be looking ahead. So what are the supply dynamics in terms of demographic trends and turnover predictions? What's the business vision? What's the demand that we can anticipate from our organisation? In terms of industry trends, customer competitive requirements, and what's the business strategic vision. Understanding what the gaps are across the organisation, who wants to do what to that point, and we don't understand people's career goals. What are the skills gaps that we have that might be risks for our business, and then creating an action plan across the organisation that's going to help us address those supply gaps, and particularly engaging our stakeholders and the business leaders in terms of how we can create a workforce plan that's going to create agility for us into the future, so that our workforce is ready, armed and able. And we've seen this being delivered at scale at some of our clients. So if I'm using as an example of an organisation that invested really beautifully in the readiness of their organisation, they were the first to release a COVID-19 test. So first to market. They were using our fuel gigs, which is our project marketplace, so they could rapidly redeploy people into these crisis response teams. But not only that, the organisation had been using the opportunity marketplace to connect people to learning opportunities, to stretch assignments, to gigs, to learning gigs, to mentors, to coaches, and to learning assets. And so what we saw in that 6 months leading up to them releasing this COVID-19 test, that organisation of 110,000 employees had taken 375,000 reskilling actions in 6 months. And so this is showing how we can reskill an organisation at scale by enabling not only the skill gap analysis, but each and every employee to understand what their skill gaps were and to be connected to a coach who might be able to help them within the organisation, somebody that's a bit better than they are at whatever skill gap they have, or a mentor, or a learning assignment, or a learning asset, online learning. So that whole connection in the opportunity marketplace can make a huge difference in the organisation being ready, armed and able to respond. So we do think that creating an agile workforce is part of a larger concept of internal talent mobility. And part of this is challenging some of those cultural challenges, is how do you cultivate talent sharing in managers and employees so that an employee can market their skills to the organisation, have visibility to opportunities, but also the leaders in the organisation having visibility to talent. And this creates an absolute transformation in the cost of talent, with 60% improvement in employee retention and reduction in recruitment costs, 55% increase in positions filled internally, and 1 million hours unlocked of productivity gains where internal gigs and stretch assignment marketplaces are being used. And of course, this is contributing to transformation of the value of talent within the organisation. Your people are more ready, willing and able and connected to opportunities. So what's the rationale behind a talent marketplace? I wanted to share in concluding with you today. And currently, it's easier to find a job on LinkedIn or on Indeed than it is within your own organisation. So for people to be connected to vacancies, let alone stretch assignments. Less than a third of organisations have got that technology to see their talent visibility across the organisation. But internal hires cost half as much, half the time to onboard, promoted faster, better engagement, better productivity, and much less likely to leave. Whereas if you take somebody from the external market, there's 61% more likely to be fired, paid up to 20% more, cost twice as much, and take twice as long to get on board. So there's really good reason to create a talent marketplace, an opportunity marketplace within your organisation. And one of the things that we've championed to the HR and community around the world is that bringing in the marketplace mentality has disrupted talent systems. So just as Amazon and eBay connect you to things you want to buy with a marketplace offering, and LinkedIn, Facebook, and Tinder are connecting you with people, or TripAdvisor and Uber are connecting you with places, Fuel 50 creates an opportunity marketplace that allows people to be connected to a raft of opportunities within their organization, to create an Uber-like journey plan where I can dream of being anything I want to be. If I want to be CEO of a company, I can plug that in and my journey is created in front of my eyes. But not only that, I can see every learning opportunity. I'm connected to coaches, to mentors, to every learning asset that I need to go on that journey to fulfill my own personal dreams. And of course, at the same time, giving leaders visibility to the skills and talents across the organization. So to wrap up, it's been a fast and furious 35 minutes with lots of learning, and I will share the research and some of the key research findings with you afterwards. But we do know that employees are concerned about reskilling themselves. So in your organizations, my last question for you, are your employees asking for more opportunity to reskill? Is it on the agenda? Are you hearing it from your employees that they are concerned that they may, not have a future unless they invest in reskilling? So I'm just opening up the chat because I do think that, we found it surprising that reskilling was higher on the agenda for employees than it was for the organizations that we surveyed. We thought it might have even been number one as a strategic priority for 2022, but for employees, it was really high. Employees were not waiting for their organization to dish up the learning, and they are hungry for those learning opportunities and are taking the initiative to go on that reskilling journey. I'm getting lots of A's in the chat. So yeah, employees are hungry for it. I was delivering a webinar to Walmart employees, and they've got 1 million employees. So there was a lot of people on this webinar. And what we were talking about the future of work and the importance of reskilling. And the chat was so, I've never seen a chat stream like it. Employees were very, very concerned that they needed to reskill. They were hungry for opportunities to learn and to be connected to what was most in demand in the organization. What skills, do your employees know today what skills they need for the future? What's going to be most in demand? Has that been communicated, and are they enabled to be connected to that learning? So this is a huge challenge for organizations, is to enable their employees, because employees are not waiting for you to dish it up. They're taking their own initiative. And if an organization believes that you are investing in their development, that the organization prioritizes, values and rewards learning, then they will stay. So you can get that shift in terms of retention. So prioritizing career development made a difference. Access to career resources and learning, and really easy access to those learning opportunities. So there's a raft of opportunities that organizations, that people are providing their people, but we saw that the actual investment of organizations into learning was not as high as we thought. So 50% of leaders said their average spend was $1,000 per employee, pretty low, between 0 and 3% of the salary. Only a third of our respondents said that they felt they were investing adequately in employee development, and a third again said their organization should be investing more. And we saw again a wonderful gain spiral where organizations were investing in learning, made a big difference on retention and inclusivity outcomes. And a bit of a thought for it. Sorry, I'm accidentally moved forward, but we are seeing a bit of a shift for a return to skills-based pay, rewarding for learning. The organizations that were rewarding for learning were getting the best employee retention and engagement outcomes. So big gains to be had where you're investing and helping people connect to the future that they care about. So that's it from me. I've got 1 minute left to go. I don't know if there's any last things on chat, but I would really love you to connect with some of our learning community. My Fuely team of 90 employees around the globe, many of them IO psychologists, workforce architects, and we're constantly sharing our research and learning with our community. We'd love you to be part of our community, so please feel free to join our community and pick up some of these research papers from us. And I know that the wonderful BetterWorks team will be sharing this research with you after today's session. So thank you everyone for joining. It's been an absolute pleasure to be part of this community today, and wishing the BetterWorks team an amazing final day. Thank you everyone.